Hey guys, it is me, the Everyone Sorter. Welcome back to another video, where today, it is finally time. We will finally be saying goodbye to 2024. So, 2024 has been an amazing year for me book-wise. Like, I've read so many books. You're going to see them in a second, but I've read so many, and I've reviewed all of them, and you guys have been seeming to really enjoy my videos on them. Like, one of the books I did, like one of the book hauls, it got over 1,000 views, which I've never gotten 1,000 views on a video before, so that is just incredible. Thank you guys so much for that. But yeah, so before I show you the books, I just want to put a question in your guys' mind, and it is, how many books did I read? That was the first one. The second question is, which ones were they? And then the third question is, what did I feel about them? So keep those three questions in mind. But yeah, let's get to the books. Alrighty guys, here are the books. And I know you can already see what several of them are, but don't worry, we will get to them when we get to them. But now to answer your question, how many books did I read this year? That answer is 43. So to avoid making this video any longer than it needs to be, let's go ahead and start looking at them. So, the first book I read this year was Firestarter. And so Firestarter is basically about this guy who has a daughter who has pyrokinesis, which is the ability to start fires with your mind. And she's like super dangerous. So this evil government organization called the Shop finds out and then proceeds to hunt them down for the entire book. So this book is actually really good. It's also really short, which I know that this really small book makes it seem thicker than it is, but it's actually really short, like 12 or 14 hours or something like that. But I mean, it's sweet, it's short, and it's also like Carrie. So if you're a Carrie fan, like I am, then I think you'll really enjoy this. But yeah, Firestarter was really good and a pretty good start to the year. Okay, so the next book I read is from the Bachman Books for Early Novels by Stephen King, specifically Rage, right there. So, as you can see, it does list 4 titles on this collection. This is an omnibus with multiple books inside, but since I have single editions of those other 3 that you see, we will specifically be talking about Rage, and for good reason. So, Rage is about a guy named Charlie Decker who gets in trouble with the school because earlier in the week or whatever, he got in trouble by hitting a teacher of his with a pipe wrench. So he goes to the principal, insults the principal, gets expelled, and then in his anger, or I guess I should say rage, in his rage, he goes to his locker, gets a pistol, fatally kills 2 teachers, and then holds the class hostage for 4 hours. So, Rage is very controversial. If you've heard the story, then I'm sure you know why. But obviously it depicts a school shooting, which in modern society and society in general is just not a very cool thing to talk about. And so it was fine for 20 years when it was first published, and then after it inspired 7 real-life incidents, Stephen King was like, yeah, it should go out of print. So the only way that you can find it cheaply is in the Bachman Books for like $100 or $200 or something. You can find first edition single editions, but those are like thousands of dollars. So if you want to find Rage that's semi-affordable, this is the way to go. But yeah, I really liked Rage, which I don't know what that says about me. I guess you can worry about me, but I wouldn't worry about it because I know it's fictional, unlike those other people who took it too far. But yeah, Rage is a really good look at how teenagers view the world and how adults view teenagers and how we should view society and stuff. And it's really thought-provoking, and even though it's very controversial for inspiring violence, I think it's a really good book. But yeah, so that was Rage. And so the third book I read this year is The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. So basically, The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon is about a girl named Trisha, I believe, and she is hiking with her mother and brother, and her parents recently got divorced, so her brother's kind of freaking out about the fact that the parents got divorced. So while the mother and brother are arguing, Trisha gets lost in the woods and then has to walk around in the woods for like 9 days to find her way out. That's basically the whole book. And it's not the most interesting thing ever. I mean, it's only like that many pages. It is not a long book at all. It is very short. It's actually one of Stephen King's shortest books. But I wasn't a big fan of it, first of all, because I'm not big on wilderness survival stories. I mean, Lord of the Flies, that's one thing, and Hatchet, that's another thing, but this one just wasn't very interesting. And also, Tom Gordon is a real life baseball player, so there's obviously a lot of baseball stuff in there. I'm not big on sports either, so this book just combines two things that I'm not really a big fan of. So I wish I could like this book more, but I just don't really like it that much, but it's fine. Anyway, so the fourth book is The Institute. So The Institute is basically like a mix between Stranger Things and the X-Men, which is funny because I'm pretty sure both, the X-Men at least, are referenced in The Institute. It's basically about small children, well, not small children, about age like 11 or 12, if they have telekinesis or telepathy powers, they get kidnapped by this government organization called the Institute so that they can be harvested for government stuff and whatever, and vague villain stuff. I don't know. So yeah, of course, there's similarities to Carrie with the telekinesis. Of course, there's similarities to Firestarter, which we just talked about. Then, of course, Stranger Things and X-Men. But I really enjoyed The Institute. It's a bit of a longer read, but I think that if you stick to it and just enjoy it for what it is, I think it's really good, and it really gets going about the halfway mark. So at least read up until like the halfway point, and then it really gets going. But yeah, I really like The Institute. Okay, so the fifth book I read was Doom McKee. So Doom McKee is about a guy named Edgar Fremantle who was in a very serious accident where he lost his right arm, and part of his brain was also damaged. So now he has anger problems and a missing right arm. And his wife can't take that anymore, so what she does is she divorces him. And then to find some solace in life, Edgar decides to move to Doom McKee, which is in Florida because it's part of the Florida Keys. Oh, sorry, a finger there. And while there in Doom McKee, he takes up the hobby of painting, and he becomes like a really successful painter and stuff. But to avoid spoilers, there's something not right about those paintings. That's it. But yeah, Doom McKee is actually a more recent Stephen King book. It came out in 2008, but it was actually really enjoyable. And yeah, everybody says that this is one of Stephen King's best newer books, and I have to agree. The characters are solid, like a really solid cast of characters. Edgar is a great protagonist, and his best friend Wireman is a great sidekick to this whole thing. And so, yeah, Doom McKee is just really good. All right, anyway, book 6 is Cujo. So if you remember my video that I did last year, doing this exact same thing that I'm doing now, I talked about how Cujo was the first book that I read of 2023, and that I wasn't a huge fan of it. Basically, I just couldn't pay attention to it. A lot of things were happening. I just could not pay attention, and so therefore I was like, what is happening? And so I just suffered because of that. So what I decided to do is that this year I decided to reread Cujo to see if my thoughts would change about it, and then I actually paid attention to it, and I'm happy to say that I like Cujo a lot more. It's still quite weird because Stephen King was very much on his cocaine addiction. He actually doesn't remember writing over half of this because of his cocaine addiction. But Cujo is a very entertaining story, and the second half, because it's about the rabid dog, it is very wild and very suspenseful and stuff. But yeah, so Cujo is about a rabid dog who attacks people and stuff. That's about it. But yeah, it's pretty enjoyable on a second or even the third read if I do that. But yeah. Okay, so the 7th book I read this year was Carrie. And so, of course, this was another reread that I did, of course, because I showed Carrie on my last video last year about this. But I read it for a special reason this year. So, on April 5th, 2024, Carrie turned 50. Because on April 5th, 1974, Carrie was published. And of course, it became the movies and stuff, and like everybody loves the movies and stuff. But so this year it turned 50 years old. So I thought, what better way to celebrate the 50th anniversary of my favorite book ever than to read it in one day? And because of how short it is, that's exactly what I did. And of course, for anyone who isn't aware, although I don't think that's possible, Carrie is about a very severely bullied girl, both at school and at home, who finds out she has telekinetic powers from her mind. And so when a prank at a school prom goes very wrong, she decides to take revenge in the most violent way possible. But yeah, so this book is still really good. It really holds up 50 years later, and I cannot wait to read it again. Anyway, so the 8th book I read is the second Bachman book on this list. It is The Running Man, as you saw in the collection. So The Running Man takes place in 2025, which is only a couple days away now, which is really weird. And it's basically set in a dystopian, not very good 2025 that everything is overrun by pollution and government corruption and violence and television and stuff. And so this guy named Ben Richards, he decides to participate in the game show The Running Man because his daughter is very sick and he doesn't have any money to afford the treatment. So he wants to survive at least long enough to support for his family and stuff. He doesn't expect he's getting out of this alive, but he wants to give them enough money to get her treatment and stuff and have them survive. But yeah, so it's a very interesting look on what the future looked like to people in the 1980s. This book certainly is very dated because, I mean, yeah, pollution and violence are still problems today, but it wasn't like a massive thing, or at least as big as The Running Man makes it seem in 2025. So yeah, The Running Man is certainly an interesting look at the future. It's not completely accurate, but it still has some sort of eerie accurateness to it, which is pretty scary. And yeah, I enjoyed reading this a lot. It was a fast read. All the Bachman books are really short reads. But yeah, The Running Man is really good. All right, and then the 9th book is another Bachman book, Roadwork. So basically, Roadwork is about a guy named Barton Dawes who after discovering that his home and work will be destroyed in order to make way for a new road, he decides that he doesn't like that, loses his mind, and decides to take revenge against everybody who's going to take his life away from him. So, not a lot of people like Roadwork, but I do. It's actually my 3rd favorite Bachman book because it's all about Barton Dawes slowly losing his mind over losing his everything that he built up to this point. And it's a really good character study about how one thing affects someone so much and what they will turn to keep life the way that they want it. It's a very interesting look into the psyche of a man who's slowly losing his sanity. But yeah, it's really good and I highly recommend it. All right. And so the 10th book is the Tommyknockers. So the Tommyknockers, I'm sure you've heard of how infamous the Tommyknockers is. It's basically about a small town in Maine called Haven, which slowly gets overrun by aliens. So it's like Salem's Lot, but with aliens instead of vampires. And first of all, the book is very long. I think it's a little bit longer than it needs to be, but that's not the point. The Tommyknockers is a very weird book. Like alien stuff aside, there's just a lot of weird stuff that's going on. I'll have to reread it one of these days because it just confused me so much. But Yeah, anyway, I enjoyed it and all, but it was just really confusing. So if you like confusing stuff and aliens and long books, read the Tommyknockers, I guess. Okay, and so this one, 11, is Thinner, another Bachman book. So Thinner is basically about a morbidly obese lawyer who hits a woman in a severe hit and run accident. And her father, in his anger after he gets off basically scot free of the accident, gives him the curse, Thinner, which causes him to rapidly lose weight until he will eventually die. So he decides, I don't want to die, so I'm going to hunt down this guy and have him take the curse back or something. And so yeah, it's actually really interesting. I like the time crunch aspect because of course if you're losing weight rapidly, you don't have a lot of time to do a lot of things. So I like the quick pacing of the book. It's very snappy, it's very quick, but it certainly leaves an impression on you. And the end is just wild. But yeah, and this was also the Bachman book that got Stephen King exposed as Richard Bachman, which I will not discuss in this video, but I have briefly discussed it in Rage when I did the video on Rage, and of course the other Bachman books that I did, and I will make a video on it next year explaining everything about Richard Bachman. But yeah, Thinner is really good. All right, and so 12 is The Eyes of the Dragon. So basically, The Eyes of the Dragon is a medieval tale from Stephen King, which is not very common with him. But basically, he wrote it because he wanted to write something that his daughter would read. And I guess she was into medieval stuff or something, so he decided to write The Eyes of the Dragon. And it's basically about this king gets killed by the wizard Flag. And so his two sons, Peter and Thomas, Peter is blamed for the death and gets sentenced to living in a tall tower jail for like 4 years or whatever, and Thomas assumes the throne. And so while in jail, Peter decides that he has to break out and expose Flag. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. I'm actually not big into fantasy stuff anymore because I read Fairy Tale last year, which you would see in that video, and I was not the biggest fan of Fairy Tale, so I wasn't expecting a lot with Eyes of the Dragon, but I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. So yeah, Eyes of the Dragon is actually quite entertaining. It's also quite a bit shorter than Fairy Tale, which was probably what brought up points for me for it. But yeah, I mean, Eyes of the Dragon, it has like connections to the Dark Tower because like the main villain is Flag and stuff, and yeah, it's super short, but it's actually really interesting. So yeah, go read Eyes of the Dragon. All right, and then so here we have The Long Walk. So this is the last Bachman book I did for a while. I will read the next two next year, actually. But for right now, this is the last Bachman book that I've read. And it's basically about 100 boys, all adolescent boys. They enter a competition called The Long Walk. And basically, the only rule is that you have to walk at least 4 miles an hour, and if you get anywhere below that, then you get 3 warnings, and if you exceed those 3 warnings, you die. So this one's really interesting as well because you meet a lot of characters, and you just know that only one of them is going to come out alive. And so yeah, that's really interesting, and I really liked The Long Walk. It's my second favorite Bachman book. First is Rage, I guess I should say, which also concerns me. But yeah, The Long Walk is really good. It's also quite a small read. So if you like smaller books that end in tragedy, The Long Walk is the one for you. But yeah, go read it. It's really good. All right. And then so this one, I'm gonna move a little bit, is Billy Summers. So basically, Billy Summers is about a former hitman who just wants to move on with his life and not be a hitman anymore, but he gets dragged into the life of crime for one last job. And so basically the book is about him like dealing with that, overcoming his last job and stuff. And it's a really interesting character study. You really feel for Billy Summers. He is such a greatly written character, especially for later in Stephen King's career when he kind of fell off a little bit. But Billy Summers is a really good book, and it's one of my favorites by Stephen King. I don't have particularly a number rating for you, but it's certainly one of my favorites. So yeah, Billy Summers is cool. All right, so taking a break from Stephen King for a little bit, here we have Dune. So I'm sure you've all heard of Dune by now. It's about Paul Atreides, who realizes that he's the Messiah and will lead the Fremen people into greatness as the Emperor of the universe. So I originally never really wanted to read Dune. It just didn't seem like the thing for me. But then in 2021, I saw the newer movie in theaters, and I was very confused by it. And then earlier this year, I saw Dune Part 2 in theaters, and again was very confused by it. So I decided, yeah, might as well read the book. And I was blown away by how good this book was. Like, Dune is incredible. Frank Herbert put so much meaning and symbolism and like all this other stuff into just this one book, and it's incredible how good it is for how old it is back in 65. Because it came out in 65 and all the environmentalism and the religion and stuff, it still is really relevant today. So yeah, Dune is a really good book, and I implore you, please read Dune. It's just incredible. All right, following that up, the next book I read was the sequel to Dune, Dune Messiah. So basically, Dune Messiah takes place 12 years after the original Dune. Paul Atreides is the Emperor of the universe, and he's dealing with the fact that people now see him as a godlike being. And so this one is really existential. It's not quite as good as the first Dune, but let's be honest, none of the Dunes are as good as the first one. But Dune Messiah is still a really good take on what it means to be an icon, like a religious figure, and kind of deconstructs the hero archetype that people were used to back in the 60s. So Dune Messiah is a really good follow-up to the first Dune, and I'd recommend it. All right, so then taking a break from Dune, here we have The Weight of Blood. So basically, The Weight of Blood, it's basically like a new version of Carrie that is more modern. Yeah, it's basically like a more modern version of Carrie, but about racism instead of girl problems like Carrie was. So yeah, anyway, The Weight of Blood, it's about a girl named Maddie Washington who one day with really bad weather gets outed as black in a very white community. And then, of course, the white community is not very happy that she's outed as black. So then they decide to make fun of her and stuff. And then Maddie discovers that she has telekinesis, and then stuff goes from there. So yeah, as I said, it's basically a modern version of Carrie, but with racism. And I'm very hard on racism. I don't approve of racism at all. I don't like it. So seeing this book as like a really big clapback against racism, I think it's really strong for people of color. And I'm not a person of color, as you can see. I'm not black, but I still really like this book for just what it was about. And the fact that it's basically modern Carrie didn't hurt either. So yeah, The Weight of Blood is really good, and it certainly is not just a Carrie ripoff. It stands on its own as just a really good book. But yeah. So the next book we have is Returning to Dune with Children of Dune. So Children of Dune is Dune 3, and this one takes place 9 years after the events of Dune Messiah. And so this time, Paul Atreides' children are the main characters, Leto and Ganima. And basically, so with Paul disappeared or gone or whatever, there's kind of an absence in power. So this house Carino is trying to take over, and then Leto and Ganima are trying to stop that from happening. So Children of Dune, I think it's the first weird book of Dune. Well, I guess every Dune book is weird, but Children of Dune is really where the Dune series starts getting weird. But yeah, so Children of Dune, it's enjoyable. It's about the average length of a novel. So I think that fans of the first two Dunes would really enjoy this one. And yeah. Okay. So, and the next up is God Emperor of Dune, Dune 4. And so basically it takes place 3,500 years after Dune 3. And Leto Atreides, who was of course the main character of Dune 3, he is bonded with a sandworm towards the end of 3. So he's just been living as the God Emperor of Dune as a worm human hybrid creature thing for the past 3,500 years, and he is now like just the ruler of the entire universe, just like his father Paul was. But unlike Paul, who is seen as the Messiah, Leto was seen as a tyrant for his path of humanity that he wants to take it on, which is not very good. So yeah, it's basically just people trying to deal with Leto, who's a sandworm hybrid human thing. I know, it's weird. Dune gets really weird really fast. But anyway, Dune 4, it's about just as insane as the other Dunes. But this one was also enjoyable just because of how insane it is. It is seriously one of the most insane books I've ever read. So if you like Dune and you haven't read this one, I think you should go read this one. Okay. And then we return to Stephen King with Holly. So Holly was, at the time that I read this, the second newest Stephen King novel. You'll Like It Darker is now, and next year, Never Flinch will be. But Holly continues the never-ending saga of Holly Gibney, whose first 5 books I covered in last year's video of this. But basically, this time she is not dealing with an outsider, and she is not dealing with a serial killer named Brady Hartsfield, but this time she is dealing with an elderly couple who likes to eat people. Yes, this book gets really dark really fast, but Holly is a really entertaining read, and I think that if you like Stephen King's crime era, which is about the 2010s to now, I think you'll get a really good kick out of Holly. It's certainly interesting, but I mean, I think I've had enough of Holly, which I'm sure a lot of other people have too, but Holly is a pretty good book on its own, and yeah, I like it. Okay, so moving on, we have Insomnia. So Insomnia is sort of like what it sounds, and sort of not. Basically, Insomnia follows this guy named Ralph Roberts. He's about 70, and a couple years ago he lost his wife to like a seizure or hemorrhage or something. I don't quite remember. Brain tumor, I think. But anyway, and then in her death, he started staying up really late or like waking up super early or whatever. It's like he's starting to feel insomnia, and he's like, what is going on, you know? And so this also takes place in Derry, Maine, which is where it takes place. So you see Mike Hamlin. So, hey, Mike. But basically, it's revealed that the Ralph's insomnia was actually supposed to happen by these aliens so that he could start seeing these colorful auras around people to see what they're actually like and to stop a growing political climate. I won't reveal what that political climate is because it is quite personal for a lot of people. But yes, this book is half insomnia, half political drama, which surprised me quite a bit. But yeah, Insomnia, it's a very long read. And as with most of the long books in this list, it confused me very much. So yeah, I'll have to reread it, but it's certainly a very interesting book, and I want to reread it just to see what I can make of it this time around. Okay. So the next one we have is The Dead Zone. So, I said that Insomnia kind of touches on political issues a little bit, but The Dead Zone fully does. So basically, The Dead Zone is about this guy named Johnny Smith, who, while on his way home from his girlfriend's house, gets in a bad car accident and becomes comatose for 4 years. So for 4 years of his life, he is comatose, and he finally breaks out of it. But when he does break out of his coma, he realizes that he can hear people's thoughts, and yeah, he can just like see visions of things and stuff. And then there is a point where he cannot see certain visions and thoughts and stuff, and he calls that point The Dead Zone. So that kind of explains that title. So basically, the first half of the book is kind of just him getting used to his new psychic powers, and then the second half, we find out that there's a presidential election coming up, and then Johnny foresees that the current president-elect is not a very good guy, so he seeks to stop him. So it's half supernatural, half political thriller, which I think is very good. And of course, this book is actually quite apolitical, because nowadays we know Stephen King for of course choosing a side very much, but this book was actually very apolitical for the 70s, and I like that. I'm apolitical myself, so yeah, I really like the fact that this book is just apolitical, and it's also just really good in general. So yeah, go read The Dead Zone. It's really good. Okay, and so the next one we have is Bag of Bones. So Bag of Bones is essentially about a writer named Mike Noonan who is suffering a severe case of writer's block after the death of his wife Joanna. So he moves into their country home, Sarah Laughs, outside of Derry, Maine, because it also takes place in Derry. And he starts to realize that the house is alive, and also that he discovers that stuff is not what it seems. Like, that house has secrets, and also he meets a girl and her young daughter, so, potential love there. But yeah, so Bag of Bones is actually very intriguing with just all the history of the stuff and stuff. I guess it's about racism as well, you could say, so it's sort of like The Weight of Blood in that aspect. But yeah, it has a lot of stuff and history in it. So I got a really good kick out of this book. It was super enjoyable, but it was super weird. And this is when Stephen King started going insane, or I guess more insane than he already was. But yeah, Bag of Bones is a really good book. Okay, and then the next one is The Talisman. So, I have heard very mixed things about The Talisman. Basically, what it is that this 12-year-old kid named Jack Sawyer finds out that his mother is sick with some sort of disease. I think it's cancer or something. And so in order to save her, and by extension save her her copycat in the Talisman world, he needs to find this object called the Talisman, bring it back to her, and save her. So the entire book is just him taking a journey across the entire country to find the Talisman. And yeah, there's a lot to it. I'm not going to describe the whole plot because this video is already really long. But so yeah, The Talisman is quite an extensive book. It is quite the read, and it is really confusing. And I can understand why people don't like it very much. I enjoyed it. It is insane, but yeah. Okay, and then of course, immediately following The Talisman, we have Black House, which is the sequel to The Talisman. So this one follows Jack Sawyer, who is now a retired police detective, and he discovers a conspiracy of people kidnapping children and bringing them to this thing called Black House. So he teams up with some friends and has to stop everything at Black House. And that's really interesting. This was the second part of a 3-part trilogy in the Jack Sawyer trilogy, but as of this video, 3 hasn't existed yet. So far, this is the last we've seen of Jack Sawyer, but Stephen King said he's rereading The Talisman and Black House, so maybe Jack Sawyer 3 is coming up. But yeah, so Black House is certainly something. Ooh, and then here we have another reread. So this one is Salem's Lot. And so basically, Salem's Lot is about a writer named Ben Mears who returns to his hometown of Jerusalem's Lot, Maine, shortened to Salem's Lot, where he discovers that the town is slowly being overrun and turned into vampires. So, yeah, Salem's Lot is really good. I, of course, read this last year. This was the second book I read last year. But I read it this year, or I reread it this year, because the new Gary Dauberman movie was coming out, so I decided to get this book in and reread it before the new movie came out. so that when the new movie did come out, which I saw, I could kind of judge it from there. But yeah, Salem's Lot is still a really good book. It is dated, yes, but yeah, it's just about a small town coping with vampires. Who wants any more than that, right? Yeah, Salem's Lot is just really good. Okay, and then so here we have Night Shift. So this is a story collection. This is the first story collection in this list, and it's also probably going to be Stephen King's best. I've only read 3 of them so far, but Night Shift is by far my favorite. So I'm not going to discuss every story that goes on in here because there's 20 of them. But ones that stand out to me are The Ledge, One for the Road, Quitters Inc., and I think it's called Battlefield, but I don't remember that. It's the one with the toy soldiers. But anyway, yeah, Night Shift. Oh, yeah, it also has Children of the Corn. So if you like Children of the Corn, there you go. But yeah, Night Shift is just full of a lot of really good stories, and I really enjoyed it because, yeah, they're just super fun. Okay, and then the next book is Psycho the Werewolf. Well, it's actually novella. But so Psycho the Werewolf basically counts how many times the werewolf appears during the year. Every chapter is a new month, and they range from about 3 pages to about 10 pages because it is very short. Look at that. But so yeah, it's basically just Stephen King talking about how a werewolf comes out once every month and then just causes chaos. And then how a boy named Marty Coslaw just tries to stop him. So yeah, it's really short. I actually read this in one sitting because, I mean, it's 128 pages, so of course I was able to do that. But yeah, I mean, Psycho the Werewolf, I've heard mixed things about it, but I enjoyed it. It's super short, and it has illustrations. So if you like pictures, there you go. So yeah, that was Psycho the Werewolf. Ooh, and then this one is really interesting. The next one is Storm of the Century, which is not actually a book, but a screenplay written by Stephen King. So basically, Storm of the Century follows the town of Little Tall Island, Maine, which is also where Dolores Claiborne takes place, by the way. But basically, this one stranger named Andre Lenoge comes into town, and he's kind of causing some chaos and murdering people. And so the town's constable, Mike Anderson, arrests him. And Andre Lenoge says that he'll only go away if the town gives him what he wants. And so the whole town is like wondering, what does he want? And so that's basically what the whole miniseries is about. Yeah, it's a miniseries, but it was certainly entertaining. But I'm telling you, that ending though, and that's it. But Storm of the Century, even though it was a screenplay instead of a book, it was really good. Okay, so these next 2 are kind of a double feature. It is Hattie Harmony Worry Detective and Hattie Harmony Opening Night. And these are children's books written by Elizabeth Olsen and Robbie Arnett, which is Elizabeth Olsen's husband. But yeah, so I don't really read children's books anymore. I'm an adult now, so I don't really read children's books, but I love Elizabeth Olsen. I'm a massive fan of her, so anything that she does, I'm going to do myself, I guess. So she wrote these children's series called Hattie Harmony. There are only 2 right now, which I hope get more in the future. But yeah, it's basically about a cat who's a detective that helps children solve their problems. Solve their like mental problems and stuff. So I think it's really good for children. And yeah, I don't really have much use for them anymore, but if you're a child and you have a lot of worries, read both Hattie Harmonies. So yeah, that was the double feature. And then here we have our next book, Nightmares and Dreamscapes. So Nightmares and Dreamscapes is the second and also last story collection in this list. And this is where Stephen King's really weird stories happen. It's like there's one called Dolan's Cadillac, where a guy has to get back at this guy who killed his wife by burying his Cadillac in the road. And there's one called Rainy Season, where these giant demon frogs like break windows and eat people and stuff. It is insane, man. So Nightmares and Dreamscapes, it's certainly a collection. It's not my favorite It's probably my least favorite collection of the three that I've read so far, but it is certainly something. And my gosh, those stories will stick with you long after you finish reading it, like I have. But yeah, Nightmares on Dreamscapes, it is also really long. I think it's like 912 pages or something. But yeah, it's really long. But these stories, they are something else, man. Those stories are weird. Anyway, yeah, so that was Nightmares on Dreamscapes. So, the next one is another copy of Carrie. So you're probably wondering, why did I read another copy of Carrie when I already have a copy of Carrie? Well, because I like Carrie, as I said. So, of course, I already explained my thoughts on it and what it's about. So yeah, I just like the cover. It's a newer one with the 50th anniversary on there. So yeah, it's a newer cover, but I like it. So yeah, that's Carrie. And then here's something else funny. Carrie's right after that. Yep. I read Carrie, and then I read it again. So, yeah, obviously, this is a different cover with a silhouette of presumably Carrie, with Stephen King's name, and then Carrie written probably in blood. So, yeah, of course, this book is just really good, and then, yeah. Okay, so the next one we have is Revival. Oh, it has popped there. But yes, we have Revival next. So basically, Revival is about a guy named Jamie Morton who, as a child, had a really good church pastor, but the church pastor lost his wife and son in a horrific car accident and kind of shuns religion altogether. And so years later, when Jamie's like 30 or 40, he meets up with his old pastor, and his old pastor is now healing people with the power of electricity. Like you got a drug addiction, boom, electricity will heal it. You got a back problem, boom, electricity will heal it, and stuff like that. But yeah, this ending is insane. Like, I've heard that Revival has one of the darkest Stephen King endings ever, and after reading it, I agree. It is insane. So this book is really good. This book won't be for everyone because religious people probably won't like it very much. I mean, I am, and I enjoyed it, but like, even if you're not religious, you probably won't like it with all the religion and stuff. But either way, Revival is about electricity, and electricity is cool, and the ending is just so dark, man. I think it's even darker than Storm of the Century, which is weird. But yeah, so that's Revival. Okay. And then so the next one is Dolores Claiborne. So I've heard that Dolores Claiborne is one of the better Stephen King books ever. And basically, Dolores Claiborne is not written as a novel, but instead it's a testimonial. So basically, Dolores Claiborne has been accused of killing her charge who hired her years ago to take care of her and stuff. And so the entire book is just her giving her testimony about what happened, what led her to those choices, and basically her entire life with everything on a little tall island. So yeah, I mean, it's a short book, and not everyone will like the testimonial aspect of it. I certainly found it off guard at first. It certainly caught me off guard, but the story itself was really interesting. And yeah, I think it's a good read for anyone who likes crime dramas. So yeah. Okay, and then we finally return to Dune with Heretics of Dune, Dune 5. So Heretics of Dune takes place another 1,500 years after God Emperor of Dune, and with Leto now dead, everyone is kind of living on his golden path for humanity to take, but people don't exactly like that. So, Frank Herbert shenanigans ensue, and then it's basically just like 600 pages of people just like talking and, all the other stuff from Dune, and then it's just people trying to get out of the golden path, and then in the end, Arrakis gets destroyed. Yeah, that is very depressing because Arrakis has been there the whole series, and then Arrakis is just no more. So yeah, Heretics of Dune, I think, is where Dune started failing for me, because I loved 1 and 2 was really good. 3 and 4 were kind of decent, and then 5, while I enjoyed 5, it kind of started to lose me a little bit. It just got too weird. Frank Herbert started to write like Stephen King and just make like really explicit stuff for no reason. So yeah, Heretics of Dune. It's something. It's certainly something. And then, of course, immediately following Dune 5 is Chapter House Dune, which is Dune 6. So this was the last Dune book that Frank Herbert wrote, but not the last one he planned. He planned Dune 5 because 6 ends on a cliffhanger, but he died before he could write 7. So Chapter House Dune was the last Dune book that he wrote before he died. And basically this one takes place about 10 years after 5, I believe. And all the characters from 5 basically return either as Golas or just as characters. And it's basically the Bene Gesserits leading the fight against the Honored Maiters, which are like the new Harkonnens. So yeah, it's certainly not a bad final book for Frank Herbert, but I do wish he had stayed alive to finish 7 or to write 7 and release it. His son later did turn 7 into 7 and 8, but I wish that Frank Herbert would have gotten to write 7 the way that he wanted to. But yeah, Chapter House Dune is pretty good. All right, and so the next one we have here is Charlie the Choo Choo, which is another children's book. It is written by Beryl Evans, but Beryl Evans is actually a pseudonym for Stephen King. Look at that right there. So basically, Charlie the Choo Choo, scary train aside, Charlie the Choo Choo is about a train who is getting replaced by modern technology trains, like the electric trains and stuff. And the world really has no use for a steam engine anymore, so they kind of put him in retirement. So the book is about him overcoming his retirement and becoming a really useful engine again. Thomas reference. But yeah, so Charlie the Choo Choo is actually really interesting because Stephen King, of course, wrote his books in the Dark Tower series. And book 3, The Wastelands, which the villain is an evil train, which is really funny to say it's an evil train with a face. One of the characters in The Wastelands picks up a book called Charlie the Choo Choo. So Stephen King decided to turn that book into real life. And so here we have Charlie the Choo Choo. And it's a children's book. So if you have any children, or if you are a child who likes to read children's books, there you go, I guess. All right, we're on the final stretch. So here we have Rose Madder. And so basically Rose Madder is about a woman named Rosie Daniels who for 14 years of her life has been living with Norman Daniels, who is just the most abusive husband you've ever seen. Like, he causes her to have a miscarriage just because of his physical abuse, which is terrible. So one day, Rosie sees a spot of blood on her bed sheets and decides that if she stays with Norman, he's going to kill her. So she packs up everything and leaves him on the spot. And so basically the book is her getting reaccustomed to life without Norman. And then she finds a painting with that bull in it that only the book can explain. But meanwhile, Norman is tracking her down to find her, to teach her a lesson. So that is certainly very interesting. And it is certainly quite the read. Like, it is a very interesting read. I've heard very mixed things about Rose Madder, but I like it. I'd even say I like it more than Dolores Claiborne, which is probably blasphemous. But Rose Madder is really good, and I highly recommend reading it. Okay. So, Elevation is the next book. And first of all, it's very short. You can get done within like a day or two like I did. But basically, Elevation is about a guy who is losing weight, but not physically. Like, he physically weighs lighter, but he doesn't look like he loses weight. He starts the book at like 240, I think. And then by the end, even though he's like 2 pounds, he still looks like he's like 240. So yeah, I basically describe it, as well as everyone else, as thinner but worse. Because that's kind of what it is. It's like thinner, but a little bit different and a little worse. I mean, it's not a bad book. I've heard that it is, but it's really not that bad. And yeah, it's a short read. So if you're looking for something short to read, yeah, go read Elevation. All right, and then here we have Carrie again. Last time, I promise. This is the last Carrie I have. I only have 4 copies, and this is the 4th copy. So So I've already described what I think about this, so moving on. And then, of course, the final book we have here is Needful Things. So I've heard amazing things about Needful Things. I've heard that it's one of Stephen King's best, and after reading it, I have to agree. So basically, I will say that I kind of read Stephen King out of order in case all of that wasn't obvious. But so in order to fully understand Needful Things, from my knowledge, you need to read The Dead Zone, which I have, Cujo, which I have, The Dark Half, which I haven't, Four Past Midnight, which I have not, and then Needful Things, because this is the ultimate Castle Rock story. Like, every book that's taken place in Castle Rock up to this point is referenced in Needful Things, and it's the ultimate Castle Rock tale. So basically what happens in Needful Things is that this guy named Leland Gaunt comes to Castle Rock and opens up a shop called Needful Things. And you can buy anything that you desire, Needful Things. Even if it's something like super obscure, Leland Gaunt has it. But in exchange for buying it, you have to pay for it 2 times. Once with money and once with a prank. And so almost the entire town falls for this thing. And Leland Gaunt's goal is basically to turn the entire town into chaos. Leland Gaunt's whole thing is just turning Castle Rock into a state of madness and chaos and violence and death. And so it's really interesting because this book is like 800 pages long. And so it's just 800 pages of just people just turning on each other and getting mad and getting violent and everything. So it's just 800 pages of just chaos, which is really cool. Well, not the chaos part, but like the book is just really interesting because of how like greed and all that stuff just affects people in the worst ways possible. So yeah, Needful Things is a really good book, and it was a great way to wrap up 2024. All right, so now we have looked at all of these books. So I guess it's finally time to wrap up this video. But yeah, guys, that is it for this video and for the videos of 2024. I've had such an amazing year with you guys watching my videos and stuff. You are making all my YouTube dreams come true. As I said earlier, I had a video that reached over 1,000 views, which I've never had happen to me before. So yeah, 2024 was a really good year for me on YouTube and a really good year for me reading in general. Because 43 books, that's incredible. Do you remember how many books I looked at last year? 15, and now I have 43. That's insane. I've read 43 books this year. But yeah, anyway, thank you guys so much for giving me all your support throughout this year. It was been really incredible making these videos and having you guys interact with them and like them and share them and comment on them and stuff. It's just been incredible. It's just been incredible. I'm just speechless almost. But yeah, I mean, that concludes my channel for 2024. And in 2025, I have some things that will, I have some changes that will be made in 2025, and I will discuss that in 2025. But until then, I've been Ben from the Emerald Sword, and I will see you guys next time.